The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Montana like a shroud, and Thomas Mackenzie stood on his porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun struggle through the gray clouds. At 52, he had grown accustomed to the silence that surrounded his ranch, a silence that had become both his companion and his curse since losing his wife Sarah 3 years ago. The 2,000-acre spread that once echoed with laughter and dreams now felt like a monument to everything he'd lost. Thomas was not a man of many words, never had been. Even before grief carved deeper furrows into his weathered face, the ranch hands respected his quiet authority, understanding that when Tom Mackenzie spoke, it was because he had something worth saying. His reputation in Copper Ridge was that of a fair but distant man, someone who paid his bills on time, helped neighbors during harsh winters, but kept his own counsel and his own pain. The crunch of gravel on his long driveway interrupted his morning ritual. A dust cloud followed an old pickup truck as it wound its way toward the main house, moving too fast for a social call. Thomas set down his mug and stepped off the porch, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with purpose. The truck belonged to Deputy Sheriff Maria Santos, and the tight expression on her face as she climbed out told him this wasn't a friendly visit. "Morning, Tom," Maria said, her voice carrying the weight of difficult news. She'd been a friend of Sarah's, one of the few people in town who still made an effort to check on him. Behind her professional demeanor, Thomas could see genuine concern. "Maria," he nodded, waiting. In his experience, rushing people with bad news only made things worse. "We've got a situation. Found a little girl about an hour ago walking along Highway 287. She's maybe 6, 7 years old. Scared as hell and won't tell us her name." Maria paused, studying his face. "Thing is, Tom, she had a note pinned to her dress. Specifically mentions you." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Me? Says to bring her to the Mackenzie Ranch. Says you'll know what to do." Maria reached into her jacket and pulled out a small piece of paper, worn and creased. "Tom, there's more. The note. It's signed Emma." The name hit him like a physical blow. Emma, Sarah's younger sister, the one who'd disappeared into the chaos of addiction and bad choices nearly 8 years ago, the one who'd broken Sarah's heart by refusing help, by choosing drugs over family, by vanishing into the shadowy world of the streets. Sarah had never stopped hoping, never stopped leaving the porch light on, never stopped believing that someday Emma would come home. Thomas took the note with hands that trembled slightly. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, but unmistakably Emma's. He'd seen it on countless birthday cards and Christmas letters before everything went wrong. "Tom, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead or wish I was. This is Lily, my daughter. She's 7. I can't keep her safe anymore. Please. Sarah always said you were the best man she knew. I have no one else. Take care of her. She's all I have that's good in this world. Emma." The world seemed to tilt around him. A daughter. Emma had a daughter, and she was asking him, Thomas Mackenzie, a man who'd never had children of his own, who'd grown more isolated with each passing year, to take care of her. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "In my patrol car. She's been through hell, Tom. Won't speak to anyone, flinches when we get too close. We've called child services, but they're backed up. Could be hours before they get here." Thomas looked toward the patrol car and saw a small figure huddled in the back seat. Even from a distance, he could see she was tiny, fragile, wearing a faded sundress that had seen better days. Something in his chest tightened, not the familiar ache of grief, but something else, something that felt almost like purpose. "Bring her inside," he said quietly. Maria hesitated. "Tom, you know I can't just—" "You said child services is backed up. You said she's scared." Thomas met her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, Maria. You know where to find me. But that little girl doesn't need to sit in a patrol car while bureaucrats figure out what to do with her." There was a long moment of silence. Maria had known Tom for 15 years, had watched him and Sarah build their life together, had seen how her death had hollowed him out. But she also knew his character, knew that despite his grief, he was fundamentally a good man. "All right," she said finally, "but I'm staying until child services gets here. And Tom, don't get too attached. The system has rules about these things." As they walked toward the patrol car, Thomas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the window, he could see the child more clearly now. She had dark hair that hung in tangles around her face and eyes that seemed too old for someone so young. She was clutching a small stuffed rabbit that had clearly seen better days, and when she saw the adults approaching, she pressed herself further into the corner of the seat. Maria opened the door slowly, speaking in gentle tones. "Hey, sweetheart. Remember me, Deputy Santos? This is Mr. Mackenzie. He's going to help take care of you." The child, Lily, looked up at Thomas with eyes that were the same shade of green as Sarah's, the same shade as Emma's. The resemblance was subtle but unmistakable, and Thomas felt something break open inside his chest. She was beautiful and heartbreaking, and so very, very small. "Hello, Lily," he said, crouching down to her level. His voice was softer than it had been in years. "I'm Tom. Your mama asked me to take care of you." She studied his face with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. Slowly she climbed out of the patrol car, still clutching her rabbit. Thomas noticed she moved carefully, as if she'd learned to make herself small, to avoid drawing attention. "Are you hungry?" he asked. It seemed like the most practical place to start. She nodded, just barely. "Well, let's get you something to eat then." As they walked toward the house, Thomas felt the weight of the moment settling around him. This child, this small, frightened girl, who carried his late wife's eyes and his sister-in-law's trust, was about to change everything. He thought about the note, about Emma's desperate words, about the faith she'd placed in him despite their complicated history. The ranch house that had felt like a mausoleum just an hour ago suddenly felt different. The silence was still there, but it no longer felt empty. It felt expectant, waiting to be filled with something new. Thomas Mackenzie had spent 3 years learning to live with loss. Now it seemed he was about to learn something entirely different. As he held the door open for Lily and watched her step carefully into his world, he made a silent promise to Sarah, to Emma, and to this small girl who'd been entrusted to his care. Whatever it took, he would not let her down. The kitchen felt different with Lily in it. Thomas moved carefully around the familiar space, hyper-aware of every sound he made as he prepared a simple breakfast. The child sat at the oak table Sarah had picked out 12 years ago, her small hands folded in her lap, the stuffed rabbit positioned carefully beside her plate. She hadn't spoken a word since arriving, but her eyes followed Thomas's every movement with the wariness of someone who'd learned that safety was temporary. Deputy Santos sat across from her, occasionally attempting gentle conversation that was met with silence. Thomas appreciated Maria's patience, but he could see the professional concern in her eyes. This wasn't just about a displaced child. This was about a little girl who'd clearly experienced trauma, and the clock was ticking on official intervention. "Here we go," Thomas said softly, setting a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of Lily. He'd added some strawberries he'd found in the refrigerator, arranging them in a small pattern that Sarah used to make for him during their early marriage days. Not fancy, but it should help. Lily stared at the food for a long moment, then picked up the fork with careful precision. She ate slowly, methodically, as if she'd learned not to waste anything. Thomas noticed she saved the strawberries for last, eating them one at a time with an almost reverent attention. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Thomas had learned to read the subtleties of quiet. This wasn't the silence of fear, but of assessment. Lily was studying him, trying to figure out what kind of man he was, whether she could trust him. It was a weight he felt acutely. "Tom," Maria said quietly, "we need to talk about what happens next." He poured himself another cup of coffee, using the mundane action to buy time. "I know. Child services will be here within the hour. They'll want to place her in temporary care while they investigate Emma's situation and look for other family members." Maria's voice carried the weight of procedure, but Thomas could hear the reluctance in it. "You know I can't just leave her here without proper authorization." Thomas nodded, understanding the position Maria was in. But as he watched Lily carefully cut another piece of toast, he felt something fierce and protective rising in his chest. This child had been through enough upheaval. The thought of her being shuttled to another stranger, another temporary solution, made something in him rebel. "What if I applied to be her temporary guardian?" he asked quietly. Maria looked surprised. "Tom, that's a big step. Are you sure you're ready for something like that?" Before he could answer, a new voice cut through the morning air. "Well, I'll be damned." Tom Mackenzie with a house guest. Thomas turned to see Jake Morrison, his ranch foreman, standing in the kitchen doorway. Jake was 63, weathered by decades of Montana weather, and had been working the ranch since before Thomas inherited it from his father. He was also one of the few people who felt comfortable walking into the house without knocking. "Jake," Thomas said, noting how Lily had gone rigid at the unexpected voice. "This is Lily. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Jake's experienced eyes took in the scene, the deputy, the scared child, the tension in Thomas's shoulders. He'd been around long enough to read situations quickly, and his voice gentled automatically. "Well, hello there, Miss Lily. I'm Jake. I help take care of the horses out there." Lily's eyes flickered with interest at the mention of horses, but she remained silent. You know, Jake continued, settling into the conversation with the easy manner of someone comfortable around skittish animals. We've got a mare out there who just had a foal. Little thing all legs and attitude. Might be something you'd like to see later if you're interested. For the first time since arriving, Lily's expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but a softening around her eyes that suggested curiosity. Maria's radio crackled to life, and she stepped outside to take the call. Through the window, Thomas could see her pacing as she spoke, her body language suggesting complications. "So," Jake said, settling into the chair Maria had vacated, "want to tell me what's really going on here?" Thomas found himself explaining the situation in low tones, occasionally glancing at Lily to gauge her reaction. She seemed to be listening, but her attention was also drawn to the window, where she could see horses grazing in the pasture beyond. "Emma's girl," Jake said thoughtfully when Thomas finished. "Sarah's sister. I remember her. Wild thing, but there was good in her. Sarah never gave up hoping. The note says she might be dead," Thomas said quietly. Jake studied Lily with knowing eyes. "Well, dead or not, she did right by the girl. Brought her to you," Maria returned, her expression grim. "That was my supervisor. Child Services is dealing with an emergency situation. Won't be able to get out here until tomorrow at the earliest. They want me to transport her to a temporary facility in Billings." "No." The word came out of Thomas with more force than he'd intended. Lily looked up at him, startled by the intensity in his voice. "Tom, she's been through enough. Look at her, Maria. You want to put her in another strange place with more strangers?" Thomas felt Jake's supportive presence beside him, and it gave him strength to continue. "I'm not going anywhere. You know where to find me. Give me 24 hours to get the paperwork started for temporary guardianship." Maria looked conflicted. "I could lose my job over this." "You could also give a scared little girl one night of stability," Jake said quietly. "Sometimes doing what's right isn't the same as following procedure." The radio crackled again, and Maria answered it with visible frustration. After a brief conversation, she returned to the table. "My supervisor says if you're willing to take responsibility, and if I stay to supervise, we can make it work until tomorrow. But Tom, you need to understand, this isn't permanent. The system has processes for a reason." Thomas nodded, but privately he was already thinking beyond tomorrow. He looked at Lily, who was watching the exchange with those two old eyes, and made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. "Lily," he said, crouching down beside her chair, "would you like to see those horses Jake mentioned?" She nodded, and for the first time Thomas saw a flicker of something that might have been hope in her expression. As they prepared to head outside, Thomas caught sight of himself in the hall mirror. The man looking back at him was the same one who'd stood on the porch that morning, but something fundamental had shifted. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but it no longer felt like his only companion. Responsibility had joined it, and with responsibility came something he hadn't felt in 3 years: purpose. Outside, the Montana morning was crisp and clear, the kind of day that made you believe in possibilities. As they walked toward the pasture, Lily's small hand slipped into his, tentative but trusting. Thomas felt the weight of that trust settle into his bones, and with it came a fierce determination. Emma had asked him to take care of her daughter. Sarah, if she were alive, would have expected nothing less. But more than that, looking down at this brave little girl who'd survived whatever hell had brought her to his door, Thomas realized he wanted to be the man worthy of that trust. The horses lifted their heads as they approached, and for the first time since arriving, Lily smiled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pasture as Thomas watched Lily interact with the horses. She had been with him for 3 days now, and each day brought small revelations about the resilient little girl who had arrived with nothing but a note and a worn stuffed rabbit. Her initial silence had given way to whispered responses, and this morning she had spoken her first full sentence. "The baby horse is pretty." Thomas had called his lawyer the day after Lily's arrival, and the legal wheels were already turning. The temporary guardianship paperwork was in motion, but it was the waiting that tested his patience. Every phone call could bring news about Emma, about other family members, about a system that might decide he wasn't the right person to care for a traumatized 7-year-old. "Mr. Tom?" Lily's voice was soft but clear, pulling him from his thoughts. She was standing by the fence, her small hand extended toward the mare who had cautiously approached. "She's looking at me." "That's Rosie," Thomas said, moving closer. "She's curious about you. Horses are good judges of character." Lily's eyes widened with wonder as Rosie nuzzled her palm. "Does she like me?" "I think she does. Animals can sense when someone has a good heart." Thomas watched as Lily's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. The sight of it made something tight in his chest loosen slightly. The sound of an engine interrupted the moment. Thomas turned to see a familiar sedan making its way up the drive. Mary Chen from Child Services, arriving for her first official assessment. He'd been expecting this visit, had been preparing for it, but seeing the government plates on the car made his stomach tighten with anxiety. "Lily," he said gently, "there's someone here I need to talk to. Why don't you stay here with Rosie? I'll be right back." She nodded, but he could see the wariness returning to her eyes. 3 days of relative stability, and she was already learning to read the signs of potential disruption. Mary Chen was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Thomas had met her briefly in town over the years, knew she had a reputation for being fair but thorough. As she climbed out of her sedan, he braced himself for what he knew would be a comprehensive evaluation of his fitness as a guardian. "Mr. Mackenzie," she said, extending her hand, "thank you for taking such good care of Lily while we sort this out." "It's not a temporary arrangement for me," Thomas said, meeting her gaze directly. "I want to be very clear about that from the start." Mary nodded, neither encouraging nor discouraging. "I understand, but we need to make sure that what you want is what's best for Lily. That's a process that takes time." She spent the next hour touring the ranch, asking questions about his daily routine, his support system, his financial stability. Thomas found himself describing aspects of his life he'd never had to articulate before, the way he structured his days, his relationship with his neighbors, the network of people who could help if needed. Jake Morrison proved invaluable, speaking with quiet authority about Thomas's character and his capacity for responsibility. "He's the most reliable man I've ever known," Jake told Mary as they stood in the barn. "Lost his wife 3 years ago, and it about broke him, but he's coming back to himself and that little girl, like she's been good for him." "And you think he's ready for the responsibility of raising a child?" Mary asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I think he's been ready for years, just didn't know it until now." When they returned to the house, they found Lily sitting at the kitchen table with Dr. Sarah Fleming, the family doctor Thomas had called to examine her. The older woman's expression was carefully neutral as she packed her medical bag. "Mr. Mackenzie," Dr. Fleming said, "I'd like to speak with you privately." Thomas felt his stomach drop. They moved to the front porch, where Dr. Fleming kept her voice low and professional. "The good news is that Lily is physically healthy. A little underweight, some signs of stress, but nothing that proper care won't remedy." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "However, there are some concerns. She's been through significant trauma, and there are indicators that she may have witnessed domestic violence." Thomas felt anger rise in his chest, not at the doctor, but at whatever circumstances had put a child through such experiences. "What kind of indicators?" "She flinches at sudden movements, especially from men. She's hypervigilant, constantly scanning for threats, and she has some behavioral patterns that suggest she's been in survival mode for a while." Dr. Fleming's voice was gentle but firm. "She's going to need therapy, Tom. Professional help to work through whatever she's experienced. Whatever she needs," Thomas said immediately. "I don't care what it costs. It's not about money, it's about commitment. Recovery from trauma is a long process. There will be setbacks, difficult days. Are you prepared for that?" Thomas looked through the window at Lily, who was showing Mary Chen her stuffed rabbit. The child's body language was still cautious, but there was a growing comfort in her movements that hadn't been there 3 days ago. "I'm prepared," he said. When Dr. Fleming and Mary Chen finally left, Thomas found himself alone with Lily for the first time since the morning had begun. The house felt different, not empty but expectant. She was sitting at the kitchen table, carefully working on a coloring book Jake had brought her from town. "Lily," he said, sitting across from her, "we need to talk about some things." She looked up with those 2 wise eyes, and Thomas saw her brace herself for more change, more uncertainty. "I know you've been through a lot," he said, choosing his words carefully. "And I know you're probably worried about what's going to happen to you." She nodded, her grip tightening on her crayon. "I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you don't have to go anywhere either." Thomas leaned forward, trying to convey the sincerity of his words. "I know I'm not your dad, and I know this is all new and scary, but I want you to stay here with me. I want to take care of you." Lily stared at him for a long moment, and Thomas could see her processing his words, weighing them against whatever experiences had taught her to be cautious about adult promises. "Forever?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hit him like a physical blow. This 7-year-old had been forced to think about forever, to worry about permanence in a way that no child should have to. But she was asking him to make the biggest commitment of his life, and Thomas realized he'd already made it, the moment he'd read Emma's note. "Forever," he said, his voice steady and sure. "If you want to stay, I want you to stay. This is your home now." For the first time since arriving, Lily smiled with her whole face. It was a transformation that made Thomas's chest tighten with emotion he hadn't felt in years. "Can I keep my room?" she asked. "It's your room," he said. "We'll fix it up however you want." As they sat together in the kitchen, planning how to redecorate what had been his guest room, Thomas felt something shift inside him. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but it no longer felt like his only defining characteristic. He was becoming something new, not just a widower, not just a rancher, but a father to a little girl who needed him as much as he was beginning to realize he needed her. 2 weeks had passed since Lily's arrival, and the rhythm of their days had begun to settle into something that felt almost like normalcy. Thomas had never imagined how much one small person could change the texture of a house, but Lily's presence had transformed the ranch from a mausoleum of memories into something that felt alive again. Her laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long, and her careful questions about everything, from why horses wore shoes to how clouds formed, had reawakened a part of him he'd thought was lost forever. The custody evaluation was progressing smoothly. Mary Chen had made 3 more visits, each one less formal than the last, and Thomas could see the approval in her eyes as she watched him and Lily together. The therapeutic sessions with Dr. Emily Reeves in town were helping Lily work through her trauma, and while there were still difficult moments, she was beginning to open up about her life before the ranch. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as Thomas helped Lily with a simple reading book, that the past came knocking. The knock itself was wrong, sharp, impatient, nothing like the neighborly taps he was used to. Thomas glanced at the clock, 8:30 p.m., well past the time for social visits. Lily looked up from her book with immediate wariness, her body tensing in a way that broke his heart. "It's okay," he said softly, though his own instincts were telling him otherwise. "Stay here." Through the peephole, Thomas saw a man he'd never seen before, tall, lean, with the kind of restless energy that spoke of bad decisions and harder living. The stranger wore a leather jacket despite the warm evening, and his eyes constantly shifted as if looking for escape routes or threats. "Are you Tom Mackenzie?" the man asked when Thomas opened the door but left the chain lock engaged. "Who's asking?" "Name's Danny Reeves. I'm Lily's father." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Father. In all his conversations with child services, in all the paperwork and evaluations, there had been no mention of a father. Emma's note had said nothing about a man who might have parental rights. "I'm going to need some proof of that," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the alarm bells going off in his head. Danny's smile was sharp and unpleasant. "I got all the proof I need right here." He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper that looked like a birth certificate. "Now I'm here to collect my daughter." Thomas kept the door chained, studying what he could see of the document. Even in the dim porch light, he could make out Lily's name and what appeared to be Danny's signature in the father field. But something about the whole situation felt wrong, not just the timing, but the man himself. "Where have you been for the past 2 weeks?" Thomas asked. "Your daughter was found wandering on the highway." "I was looking for her," Danny said, his voice carrying a defensive edge. "Emma took off with her months ago, been trying to track them down ever since." "If you're her father, why didn't you contact Child Services? Why didn't you file a missing persons report?" Danny's expression hardened. "Listen, I don't need to explain myself to you. I want my daughter, and I want her now." Thomas felt every protective instinct he'd developed over the past 2 weeks surge to the surface. "I'm going to need you to step back off my property. If you want to discuss custody, you can contact Child Services in the morning." "Like hell I will." Danny's voice rose, losing whatever pretense of civility he'd maintained. "That's my kid in there, and I'm not leaving without her." From inside the house, Thomas heard a small, terrified voice. "That's him, that's the bad man." The words sent ice through Thomas's veins. He turned to see Lily standing at the far end of the hallway, her face pale with terror, her whole body trembling. The brave little girl who had been making such progress was suddenly reduced to the scared child who had first arrived, with a note pinned to her dress. "Lily!" Danny called out, his voice taking on a sickeningly sweet tone. "Baby, it's Daddy." "Come here, sweetheart." Lily shrank back, shaking her head violently. No, I don't want to go with him." Thomas closed the door and slid the deadbolt, then quickly moved to Lily, kneeling down to her level. "Hey, it's okay, you're safe. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." Outside, Danny was pounding on the door, his voice growing more aggressive. "Open this door, Mackenzie, I know my rights." Thomas pulled out his phone and dialed 911, keeping his voice calm for Lily's sake. "This is Thomas Mackenzie at the Double M Ranch. I need a deputy out here. There's a man claiming to be the father of a child in my care, and he's threatening to take her by force." The pounding on the door continued, interspersed with shouts that made Lily flinch with each impact. Thomas gathered her into his arms, feeling her small body shake against his chest. "I'm going to take you to my bedroom," he said quietly. "It's at the back of the house. We'll wait there until the police arrive." As they moved through the house, Thomas could hear Danny trying the windows, testing them for easy entry. The man's desperation was palpable, and it made Thomas's blood run cold to think about what might have driven him to such extremes. In his bedroom, Thomas locked the door and kept Lily close while they waited. "Can you tell me about him?" he asked gently. "About Danny." Lily's words came in stuttered whispers. "He was mean to Mama. He made her cry. He threw things." Her voice grew smaller. "He hit me when I cried." Thomas felt a rage unlike anything he'd experienced since Sarah's death. The thought of anyone laying a hand on this child, of putting that terror in her eyes, made him want to throw open the door and confront Danny with his bare hands. But Lily needed him to be steady, to be safe. "Did your mama tell you about him when she brought you here?" Thomas asked. Lily nodded. "She said he was bad. She said he might try to take me, but you wouldn't let him." The trust in her voice was both humbling and terrifying. Thomas realized that Emma had known this might happen, had known that leaving Lily with him might not be the end of the story. The sound of sirens in the distance was the sweetest noise Thomas had ever heard. Within minutes, he could hear Deputy Santos's voice outside, authoritative and no-nonsense. "Sir, I need you to step back from the door. You're on private property." When Thomas and Lily finally emerged from the bedroom, Danny was gone, and Maria was standing in the kitchen with a grim expression. "He took off when I arrived," she said. "But Tom, we need to talk. If he really is her father and can prove it, this situation just got a lot more complicated." Thomas looked down at Lily, who was still clinging to his leg. "What do you mean?" "I mean biological fathers have rights, even if they're not good people. We're going to need to contact Child Services immediately and get an emergency protection order in place." As if summoned by her words, Thomas's phone rang. The caller ID showed Mary Chen's number. "Tom, I just heard about the situation. I need you to know that we've been trying to reach you. We got a call from someone claiming to be Lily's father. He's demanding immediate custody." Thomas felt the world tilt around him. "What are our options?" "Meet me at the courthouse tomorrow morning. We're going to file for emergency custody based on the child's safety concerns." "But Tom, I have to be honest with you. If he can prove paternity and there's no formal abuse charges, this could be a long fight." After the call ended, Thomas sat on the couch with Lily curled against his side, both of them staring at the future that had suddenly become uncertain again. "Mr. Tom," Lily whispered, "are you going to let him take me?" Thomas tightened his arms around her, making a promise he prayed he could keep. "Never, I will never let anyone hurt you again." The courthouse in Billings was a fortress of bureaucracy and cold fluorescent lighting, but Thomas Mackenzie sat in the hallway with the determination of a man who had found his purpose. Beside him, Lily clutched her stuffed rabbit with white knuckles, her small body pressed against his side, as if she could somehow make them both invisible. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Thomas had spent the past 3 sleepless nights preparing for what could be the most important morning of both their lives. Mary Chen emerged from the courtroom with a stack of papers and the expression that was carefully neutral. "Tom, I need you to understand what we're walking into. Danny Reeves has hired a lawyer, a good one. He's claiming that Emma was unstable, that she kidnapped Lily from him, and that he's been searching for his daughter for months." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "And the fact that Lily is terrified of him? That's where it gets complicated. Children can be traumatized by custody disputes. The court has to determine if her fear is based on actual abuse or on confusion and instability." Mary's voice carried the weight of too many similar cases. "We have Dr. Reeves's evaluation, documenting signs of trauma, but we can't prove who caused it." Through the courtroom's glass windows, Thomas could see Danny Reeves sitting with his lawyer, a polished woman in an expensive suit who looked like she'd never lost a case she cared about. Danny had cleaned up since his aggressive appearance at the ranch. Fresh haircut, pressed shirt, the kind of makeover that spoke of coached preparation. "What about Emma?" Thomas asked. "Any word?" Mary's expression darkened. "Denver police found her 3 days ago. Overdose in a motel room. She'd been dead for at least a week. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow, but it was Lily's sharp intake of breath that made him realize she'd been listening. He looked down to see tears streaming down her cheeks, her small body shaking with grief that was far too big for someone so young. "She's gone," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mama's really gone." Thomas gathered her into his arms, feeling the weight of her loss settle into his own chest. Emma had been troubled, had made choices that hurt everyone who loved her, but she'd been Lily's mother. She'd been the one who'd made the final, desperate decision to save her daughter by bringing her to the one person she trusted to keep her safe. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered into Lily's hair. "I'm so sorry." The courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff announced that court was in session. Thomas stood, lifting Lily with him, and made his way to the table where their lawyer, David Martinez, was arranging his papers. David was a family law attorney from Great Falls, someone Mary had recommended specifically for his experience with custody cases involving domestic violence. Judge Catherine Brennan was a stern woman in her 60s who had a reputation for being fair but exacting. She reviewed the case file with the methodical attention of someone who understood that the decisions made in her courtroom would alter the trajectory of a child's life. "Mr. Reeves," she began, addressing Danny's lawyer, "your client is claiming parental rights to minor child Lily Reeves. Please present your case." Danny's lawyer, Patricia Fowler, stood with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, Mr. Reeves is the biological father of Lily Reeves, as documented by the birth certificate filed with the court. He has been searching for his daughter since her mother, Emma Reeves, removed her from his care without permission 6 months ago. She painted a picture of a concerned father whose drug-addicted ex-girlfriend had kidnapped their child, of a man who had been trying to provide stability in the chaos of Emma's addiction. It was a compelling narrative, delivered with the kind of polish that made Thomas's stomach churn. "Mr. Reeves has secured stable housing and employment," Fowler continued. "He has family support and is prepared to provide for his daughter's physical and emotional needs." When it was David Martinez's turn, he stood with quiet authority. "Your Honor, while Mr. Reeves may be the biological father, biology does not automatically confer the right to custody when a child's safety is at stake." Martinez presented Dr. Reeves's evaluation, documenting Lily's trauma responses and her specific fear of Danny. He detailed the note Emma had left, describing her desperation to protect her daughter from an unstable situation. "The child has been thriving in Mr. Mackenzie's care," Martinez continued. "She has been attending therapy, has formed healthy attachments, and has repeatedly expressed her fear of returning to Mr. Reeves's custody." Judge Brennan looked down at Lily, who was still sitting on Thomas's lap, her face buried against his chest. "I'd like to speak with the child in my chambers." The next 30 minutes were the longest of Thomas's life. He sat in the hallway with Mary Chen, watching lawyers confer and court personnel move through their routines while Lily's fate was being decided behind closed doors. When the judge finally returned with Lily, the child immediately ran to Thomas, her relief palpable. "After speaking with the child and reviewing the evidence," Judge Brennan announced, "I am ordering a temporary custody arrangement. Mr. Mackenzie will retain custody of Lily Reeves for the next 60 days, during which time a full investigation will be conducted into the allegations of abuse." Thomas felt relief flood through him, but the judge wasn't finished. "However, Mr. Reeves will be granted supervised visitation rights, 2 hours per week, with a court-appointed supervisor present. This will allow the court to assess the relationship between father and daughter while ensuring the child's safety." The gavel came down with a finality that was both victory and warning. Thomas had won the immediate battle, but the war for Lily's future was far from over. Outside the courthouse, Danny Reeves was waiting by Thomas's truck, his lawyer notably absent. The cleaned-up appearance was gone, replaced by the same hostile energy that had driven him to pound on Thomas's door. "You think you've won something?" Danny's voice was low and threatening. "She's my kid, my blood. You're just some old man playing house." Thomas positioned himself between Danny and the truck, where Lily was safely buckled in. "I'm the man who's going to make sure she's safe and loved. If you really care about her, you'll want the same thing." Danny's laugh was bitter. "You don't know anything about what I want, but you're going to learn." As they drove away from the courthouse, Lily was quiet in the back seat, processing everything that had happened. Finally, she spoke, her voice small but determined. "Mr. Tom, I don't want to see him, not even with someone watching." Thomas met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, even when it's scary. Will you be there? If they'll let me, yes. But even if I can't be in the room, I'll be right outside. I'll be waiting for you. As they drove home to the ranch, Thomas felt the weight of the next 60 days settling on his shoulders. He had 2 months to prove that he could provide the stability and love that Lily needed, while simultaneously helping her navigate the trauma of facing her worst fears in a controlled environment. The setting sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Thomas found himself thinking about the note that had started it all. Emma had trusted him to keep her daughter safe, and he'd made that promise to a 7-year-old girl who had already lost too much. He intended to keep that promise, whatever it took. Chapter 6. The Promise Kept. 3 months later, Thomas Mackenzie stood in the same courthouse hallway, but everything had changed. The man who had once lived in solitude on a Montana ranch was now holding the hand of a little girl who called him Daddy Tom and had taught him that love could grow in the spaces grief had carved out. The final custody hearing was about to begin, and Thomas felt the weight of everything they'd been through settling into this single moment. The supervised visitations with Danny Reeves had been a nightmare for everyone involved. Lily had endured 6 sessions with her biological father, each one leaving her more traumatized than the last. Danny's behavior during these visits had been erratic, sometimes trying too hard to win her affection with expensive toys and promises, other times growing frustrated and angry when she didn't respond the way he wanted. The court-appointed supervisor, Mrs. Patricia Newman, had documented everything with clinical precision. He has no understanding of child development, Mrs. Newman had told the court-appointed psychologist. He treats her like a possession to be reclaimed, rather than a traumatized child who needs patience and understanding. During the last visit, he actually yelled at her for crying and told her she was being dramatic like her mother. The psychologist's report had been damning. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, a specialist in childhood trauma, had spent hours with Lily over the past 3 months, building trust and helping her process not just her fear of Danny, but her grief over losing Emma. Her testimony would be crucial today. "Tom," Mary Chen said, approaching with a thick folder of documents, "I need you to know that Danny's lawyer is going to make one last push. They're claiming he's completed anger management classes and parenting courses." Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. "And Lily's wishes?" Dr. Hendricks will testify that forcing a child of her age to live with someone she fears would be psychologically damaging. But at the end of the day, judges are supposed to consider the biological parent's rights very seriously. As they entered the courtroom, Thomas saw that Danny looked different, more polished than ever, sitting straight-backed next to his lawyer, with what appeared to be genuine remorse on his face. It was a performance, Thomas knew, but it was a good one. Judge Brennan called the court to order and immediately addressed the elephant in the room. "Before we begin, I want to note that this case has been extensively reviewed. The court has received comprehensive reports from the supervising social worker, the court-appointed psychologist, and the child's therapist. Mr. Martinez, please present your final arguments for Mr. Mackenzie's custody petition." David Martinez stood with quiet confidence. Over the past 3 months, he'd become more than just their lawyer. He'd become invested in Lily's future in a way that went beyond professional obligation. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Lily Reeves has flourished in Mr. Mackenzie's care. Her trauma symptoms have decreased significantly under his patient, consistent parenting, and with proper therapeutic support. She has formed a healthy attachment with Mr. Mackenzie, whom she now calls Daddy Tom, and has repeatedly expressed her desire to remain in his care." Martinez presented photos from Lily's first day at the local elementary school, where she'd started kindergarten that fall. Thomas remembered that morning, how nervous she'd been, how she'd made him promise to pick her up personally, how proud she'd looked when she showed him the drawing she'd made of their family, stick figures labeled Daddy Tom, Lily, and Rosie the horse. "Furthermore," Martinez continued, "the supervised visitations with Mr. Reeves have been consistently difficult for the child. She has exhibited signs of increased anxiety before each visit and has regressed in her therapeutic progress following these encounters." Patricia Fowler stood for Danny's final argument, but Thomas could see the defeat in her posture. "Your Honor, Mr. Reeves acknowledges that he has made mistakes in the past. However, he has completed court-ordered classes and believes he deserves the opportunity to rebuild his relationship with his biological daughter." She spoke about biological bonds and second chances, about the importance of children knowing their birth parents, but her words felt hollow in the face of 3 months of documented evidence showing a little girl's terror. Then Judge Brennan did something unexpected. "I'd like to speak with Lily again, but this time in open court, with everyone present. She's old enough to understand what's happening, and I believe she deserves to have her voice heard publicly. Thomas felt his heart skip. They'd prepared for this possibility, but seeing Lily walk to the witness stand, a special low chair that had been brought in for her size, made the moment feel surreal. "Hi, Lily," Judge Brennan said gently. "Do you remember me?" Lily nodded, her voice clear but small. "You're the judge, lady." "That's right. I need to ask you some questions, okay? There's no wrong answers, just tell me what you really think." "Okay. Where do you want to live?" "With Daddy Tom. On the ranch. With Rosie and Jake and all the horses." "And why is that?" Lily thought for a moment, her 7-year-old mind working to articulate feelings that many adults couldn't express. "Because he takes care of me when I have bad dreams, and he reads me stories. And he never yells even when I spill things." She paused, looking directly at Thomas. "And because he promised Mama he would keep me safe, and he always keeps his promises." Judge Brennan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Lily, do you understand that Mr. Reeves is your biological father? He's the man who made Mama cry," Lily said with startling directness. "I don't want to live with someone who makes people cry." Thomas felt tears threatening for the first time since Sarah's funeral. The clarity and strength in Lily's voice was heartbreaking and proud-making all at once. "Thank you, Lily. You can go sit with Mr. Mackenzie now." As Lily climbed back onto Thomas's lap, Judge Brennan reviewed her notes one final time. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratch of her pen and the quiet sound of Lily humming a lullaby Thomas had taught her. After extensive review of all evidence, testimony, and psychological evaluations, Judge Brennan began, "This court finds that the best interests of the child clearly favor permanent custody with Thomas Mackenzie." Thomas felt the world shift around him, but the judge wasn't finished. "Mr. Reeves, your parental rights are hereby terminated based on abandonment, the child's documented trauma response to your presence, and your demonstrated inability to provide appropriate care. Mr. Mackenzie, your petition for adoption is approved." The gavel came down with a finality that felt like the end of one story and the beginning of another. Outside the courthouse, Danny Reeves was nowhere to be seen. His lawyer had mentioned something about not contesting the decision, about recognizing what was best for everyone involved. Thomas suspected the man had simply moved on to whatever came next in his chaotic life. "Daddy Tom," Lily said as they walked to the truck, "does this mean forever now?" Thomas knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that still carried wisdom beyond their years, but now also held security and hope. "This means forever, sweetheart. You're my daughter now, officially and always." "Good," she said with satisfaction. "I was getting tired of worrying about it." As they drove home to the ranch, their home, Thomas thought about the note that had started it all. Emma's desperate words had led to this moment, to this second chance at family that he'd never expected, and Lily had desperately needed. The Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and Thomas Mackenzie realized that sometimes the most important promises were the ones you never planned to make. Sometimes family wasn't about blood or biology, but about showing up when someone needed you most and choosing to stay. Lily fell asleep in her car seat, her stuffed rabbit clutched close, secure in the knowledge that she was going home to a place where she belonged, and Thomas drove toward their future, carrying the weight of fatherhood and the joy of promises kept. Chapter 7. Full circle 1 year later, the Double M Ranch was alive with the sound of laughter and the gentle chaos of a child's 8th birthday party. Thomas Mackenzie stood on his porch, watching as Lily raced through the pasture with 3 school friends, their shrieks of delight echoing across the Montana landscape. Jake Morrison was leading them on a treasure hunt that he'd spent all morning setting up, hiding small presents and clues around the barn and paddocks. "She looks happy," Dr. Emily Reeves said, joining Thomas on the porch. The therapist had become more than just Lily's counselor over the past year. She'd become a friend to both of them, someone who understood the journey they'd traveled together. "She is happy," Thomas replied, his voice carrying a certainty that had taken months to develop. "We both are." It had been a year of firsts. Lily's first day of 2nd grade, where she'd proudly introduced Thomas as "my dad" to anyone who would listen. Her first time riding Rosie all by herself, with Thomas walking alongside until she felt confident enough to go it alone. Her first Christmas morning in what she now called our house, where she'd insisted on making breakfast for Thomas as a surprise, slightly burnt pancakes that tasted like the best meal he'd ever eaten. But it had also been a year of healing. There had been nightmares that gradually became less frequent, therapy sessions that helped her process not just her trauma, but her grief over losing Emma. There had been difficult conversations about her mother's struggles with addiction, age-appropriate explanations that helped Lily understand that loving someone didn't mean you couldn't also be disappointed in their choices. "Mr. Tom, Daddy Tom," Lily called from the pasture, waving a small wrapped package. "Jake helped us find all the treasures." Thomas smiled, remembering when she'd first started calling him that, tentatively as if testing whether the word would be allowed to stick. Now it came as naturally as breathing, and hearing it still made something warm unfold in his chest. The party guests were neighborhood kids and their parents, people who had become part of their extended family over the past year. Thomas had been surprised to discover how much the community had rallied around them. Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store always saved the best apples for Lily. The school principal, Mr. Rodriguez, had taken special care to ensure Lily felt welcomed and supported. Even the mailman, old Pete Kowalski, had gotten into the habit of asking Lily about her horses whenever he made deliveries. As the afternoon wore on, and the other children were picked up by their parents, Thomas found himself sitting on the porch swing with Lily, both of them tired from the excitement but reluctant to let the day end. She was still wearing her party dress, a bright yellow sundress that she'd picked out herself because it's the color of happiness, Daddy Tom. "Did you have a good birthday?" he asked, though her smile had been answer enough all day. "The best one ever," she said, then paused thoughtfully. "Actually, maybe my second best birthday." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What was your best?" "The day I came to live with you, when you said I could stay forever." She leaned against his side with the casual affection that had taken months to develop. "That felt like a birthday, but for my whole life." Thomas felt that familiar tightness in his chest, not the crushing grief he'd carried for so long, but the overwhelming gratitude of a man who'd been given a second chance at happiness when he'd least expected it. "Can I tell you something?" Lily said, her voice taking on the serious tone she used when she wanted to share something important. "Always. I still miss Mama sometimes. Dr. Emily says that's okay, that you can miss someone and be happy at the same time." Thomas nodded, thinking about Sarah, about how the sharp edges of grief had softened into something more manageable, not gone, but transformed into gratitude for the time they'd had together. "Dr. Emily is very smart. I miss people too. Missing them means we loved them. I think Mama would be happy that I'm here with you," Lily continued. "She wanted me to be safe and loved, and I am. So much that sometimes I feel like my heart might burst from all the love." "That's the best kind of feeling," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, they sat together in comfortable silence. The ranch stretched out before them, pastures where horses grazed peacefully, the barn where Jake was probably finishing his evening chores, the garden where Lily had planted sunflowers that now towered over her head. "Daddy Tom," Lily said suddenly, "do you think we'll always be this happy?" It was a question that would have terrified him a year ago, this child's faith in permanent happiness, when his own experience had taught him how quickly everything could change. But now, looking at this resilient little girl who had survived so much and still believed in forever, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine optimism about the future. "I think we'll have sad days sometimes," he said honestly, "and scared days and mad days, but I think we'll always have each other, and that makes every kind of day easier to handle." "Like a team?" "Exactly like a team." Lily grinned and held out her small hand. "Partners?" Thomas shook it solemnly. "Partners." As they headed inside for dinner, leftover birthday cake and whatever Jake had left in the slow cooker, Thomas caught sight of the framed photo on the mantel. It was from Lily's adoption day, taken outside the courthouse after everything was finalized. In the picture, Lily was beaming up at him while he looked down at her with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Next to it was another photo, newer, from just last month when Lily had won the blue ribbon at the county fair for her art project, a painting of the ranch at sunset. Thomas was standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. But it was the title of Lily's painting that made visitors pause. "Home is where your family is." That night, after Lily was tucked into bed with her stuffed rabbit and a new book about horses that she'd received for her birthday, Thomas stood in his bedroom and looked at the note that had started it all. He'd kept Emma's desperate plea, not as a reminder of obligation fulfilled, but as a testament to the power of trust and second chances. "Tom, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead or wish I was. This is Lily, my daughter. She's 7. I can't keep her safe anymore. Please. Sarah always said you were the best man she knew. I have no one else. Take care of her. She's all I have that's good in this world. Emma." Emma had been right about one thing. Lily was good. She was brave and funny and wise beyond her years. She'd taught Thomas that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about building something beautiful in spite of it. She'd shown him that family wasn't just about blood or legal documents, but about showing up every day and choosing to love someone even when it was hard. As Thomas turned off the lights and settled into bed, he could hear Lily humming softly in her room. The same lullaby he'd taught her, the one Sarah used to sing. The sound wrapped around him like a blessing, a reminder that sometimes the most profound gifts come disguised as the heaviest burdens. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new opportunities to prove worthy of the trust a desperate mother had placed in him. But tonight, Thomas Mackenzie fell asleep, knowing that he was exactly where he belonged, in a house filled with love, raising a daughter who called him daddy, living the life he'd never dared to dream was possible. The note had promised him nothing except responsibility. But responsibility, he'd learned, was just another word for the chance to love someone completely. And that chance had given him everything: